Picture this: the year is 1298, and a weary traveler steps off a ship in Venice after an absence of more than 2 decades. His name is Marco Polo, and the stories he brings back from the distant lands of the East will ignite Europe's imagination like never before. But here's the twist: centuries later, we're still unraveling the mysteries hidden within his writings. Were his accounts of golden palaces, exotic spices, and strange customs accurate descriptions of the Mongol Empire, or were they embellished tales meant to dazzle his audience? The truth is, Marco Polo's travelogue, The Travels of Marco Polo, remains one of history's most fascinating puzzles, filled with details that historians still hotly debate today. What makes these debates so intriguing is how they blur the line between fact and legend. Take, for example, his descriptions of the court of Kublai Khan. Did Marco Polo truly serve as an official in the Mongol administration, or did he borrow stories from other travelers to craft his narrative? Some scholars point to missing records or inconsistencies in his accounts, while others argue that his observations align remarkably well with archaeological findings. And then there are the truly bizarre details, like his mention of a bird so large it could lift an elephant into the air. Could this have been a misunderstood encounter with a now extinct creature, or pure fantasy? The questions pile up, and each one pulls us deeper into the enigma of Marco Polo's world. In this video, we're diving into 20 of the most hotly contested details from his writings, details that continue to spark curiosity, skepticism, and wonder. From the accuracy of his geographical descriptions to the oddities that defy easy explanation, we'll explore why these passages still captivate historians and adventurers alike. Was Marco Polo a meticulous observer of cultures unseen by European eyes, or a master storyteller spinning tales to entertain? The answers might surprise you, and by the end, you'll see why his legacy is anything but settled. So let's journey back to the medieval world, where fact and folklore collide, and uncover the secrets hidden in the pages of one of history's most debated travelogues. One of the most striking moments in Marco Polo's writings comes when he describes stumbling upon a strange substance in China, black stones that burned like wood. To European readers of his time, this claim seemed utterly fantastical. After all, how could rocks possibly catch fire? Many dismissed it as yet another tall tale from a traveler prone to exaggeration. But here's where history took an unexpected turn centuries later. Explorers confirmed that Marco Polo was actually describing coal, a fuel source that was already in widespread use across Asia, but completely unknown in medieval Europe. This revelation forced historians to confront an uncomfortable question. If Marco Polo was right about something as seemingly unbelievable as burning stones, what else in his travelogue might have been unfairly labeled as fiction? Suddenly, the credibility of his entire account was up for debate. Some scholars argue that his accurate description of coal suggests he truly witnessed the innovations of the Mongol Empire firsthand. Others counter that he could have simply heard about coal from other travelers and included it for dramatic effect. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Marco Polo may have embellished certain details, but his writings also contain startlingly precise observations that align with historical records. And speaking of the unbelievable, his descriptions of the animal kingdom were just as bewildering to his audience. Take his account of creatures with the body of a deer, the tail of an ox, and a single horn sound familiar. Many believe this was one of the earliest European references to what we now call the rhinoceros. But as with the black stones, Marco Polo's words were met with skepticism. How could anyone trust a man who claimed to have seen beasts straight out of myth? Yet once again, modern discoveries have lent weight to his claims, blurring the line between the fantastical and the factual in his travelogue. What makes these details so fascinating isn't just their accuracy or lack thereof, but what they reveal about the collision of cultures in the medieval world. Marco Polo's writings forced Europeans to question everything they thought they knew about the limits of nature, technology, and even geography, and that's precisely why his legacy remains so contentious. Every time we think we've pinned down the truth behind one of his claims, another mystery emerges, leaving us to wonder, was Marco Polo a visionary chronicler of the unknown, or a masterful storyteller spinning half-truths into legend? The answer, it seems, is as complex as the man himself. Marco Polo's encounter with what he called a unicorn is one of the most fascinating and misunderstood details in his entire travelogue. When he described a massive creature with a single horn on its forehead, his European readers immediately pictured the mythical beast of legend. But here's the twist: he wasn't talking about a horse-like unicorn at all. Instead, he was almost certainly describing a rhinoceros, an animal utterly foreign to medieval Europeans. His account called it ugly and not at all like the unicorns of our stories. Yet the label stuck, revealing just how deeply cultural expectations shaped his interpretation. Why did he call it a unicorn in the first place? The answer lies in the way medieval minds processed the unfamiliar. Without a reference point for creatures like rhinos, Polo and his contemporaries defaulted to the closest thing they knew: mythical beasts from folklore. It's a perfect example of how even the most observant travelers could bend reality to fit their worldview. But here's where it gets even more interesting: his description of the animal's behavior. Its aggression, its thick hide, even the way it used its horn, matches modern knowledge of rhinos with eerie accuracy. That raises a tantalizing question. Was this a case of mistranslation, or did Polo deliberately use the term unicorn to make his story more relatable to his audience? Some historians argue that the confusion came from local guides or translators, who may have used the word unicorn to explain the creature's single horn. Others suggest Polo himself chose the term knowing it would captivate readers back home. Either way, the episode highlights a recurring theme in his travels: the collision between first-hand observation and the urge to sensationalize. And it wasn't just animals that left him grappling for words. When faced with customs, landscapes, or technologies that defied European norms, he often resorted to comparisons that blurred the line between fact and fantasy. This struggle to describe the utterly foreign brings us to our next mystery, one that goes beyond animals and into the heart of human culture. Because if Marco Polo could mistake a rhinoceros for a unicorn, how did he interpret the even more complex social rituals he witnessed? His accounts of distant courts, burial practices, and even dining customs were filtered through the same lens of medieval European bias. And that's where the debates get even more intense. Among Marco Polo's most chilling accounts is his description of the Andaman Islands, where he claimed to have encountered tribes who practiced cannibalism. He wrote of people with dog's teeth who allegedly feasted on human flesh, a portrayal that sent shivers down the spines of medieval Europeans. But how much of this was grounded in reality, and how much was shaped by the fears and prejudices of his time? Modern anthropology offers some surprising answers. While no concrete evidence supports the existence of cannibalistic practices in the Andaman Islands during Polo's era, his description fits a pattern of colonial-era narratives that often dehumanized indigenous peoples as savages to justify conquest or conversion. Digging deeper, historians note that Polo's account bears striking similarities to earlier myths circulating among Arab and Persian traders, tales of monstrous races living at the edges of the known world. It's possible he absorbed these stories uncritically, weaving them into his own narrative to shock and captivate his audience. Yet there's another layer to consider: the island's isolation. The Andamanese tribes, with their distinct languages and customs, were so culturally remote from Polo's frame of reference that he may have interpreted their rituals or warfare through a lens of sheer misunderstanding. For instance, some scholars suggest that ceremonial practices involving bones or symbolic warfare could have been misconstrued as evidence of cannibalism. This raises a broader question: why were such lurid details so readily believed? The answer lies in the medieval European worldview, where distant lands were often imagined as realms of marvels and horrors. Polo's cannibal story wasn't just a travel anecdote, it was a reflection of the era's fascination with the exotic, other. And this tendency to exaggerate cultural differences didn't end with the Andamans. When Polo turned his attention to marriage customs in Asia, his observations sparked just as much debate. Take his description of Tibetan polyandry, where women married multiple brothers, a practice that horrified his Christian readers. Polo framed it as a pragmatic solution to scarce resources, but his tone betrayed his discomfort. Later travelers confirmed the accuracy of this custom, yet Polo's portrayal was tinged with moral judgment, calling it against all nature. Here again, we see the tension between observation and bias. His writings oscillate between genuine curiosity and a compulsion to frame foreign traditions as strange or inferior. What makes these cultural accounts so contentious isn't just their factual accuracy, but what they reveal about the storyteller himself. Polo was both a product of his time and a bridge between worlds, capable of stunning insight one moment and startling distortion the next. And that duality keeps historians guessing. Was he documenting the world as he saw it, or shaping it to fit the expectations of his audience back home? The line between witness and storyteller has never been thinner. Marco Polo's descriptions of marriage customs in the Mongol Empire left his European readers stunned, particularly his accounts of noblemen taking multiple wives, a practice that flew in the face of Christian monogamy. He wrote with a mix of fascination and disapproval about how khans and high-ranking officials maintained sprawling households with dozens of wives and concubines. To medieval Europeans, this wasn't just exotic, it was scandalous. But here's where modern historians step in. Was Polo exaggerating to shock his audience, or was he accurately documenting a cultural norm? The answer lies in comparing his accounts with other sources from the period. Persian and Chinese records from the same era confirm that polygamy was indeed widespread among Mongol elites, particularly as a tool of political alliance building. Kublai Khan himself reportedly had 4 principal wives and numerous concubines, a system Polo described in detail. Yet there's a twist. While the practice was real, Polo's tone often amplified its strangeness to European sensibilities. He emphasized the jealousy and rivalry between wives, painting a dramatic picture of harem life that may have been more theatrical than factual. Some scholars argue he played up these tensions to make the stories more engaging, while others point out that his observations align with archaeological evidence of separate living quarters for wives in Mongol palaces. What makes this debate so revealing is how it mirrors Polo's broader struggle to navigate cultural differences. He wasn't just a passive observer, he was filtering everything through the lens of a medieval Venetian Christian. When he described Tibetan polyandry, where one woman married multiple brothers, his shock was palpable. He called it against the laws of nature, yet he also noted its practical purpose in preventing land division among heirs. This tension between judgment and curiosity runs through his entire travelogue, offering a window into how medieval Europeans processed the unfamiliar. Modern anthropologists have since verified many of these marriage customs, but Polo's framing still raises questions. Did he fully grasp the social and economic reasons behind these practices, or did he reduce them to sensational anecdotes for his readers? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. His accounts contain enough accurate details to suggest first-hand exposure, but his interpretations were undeniably shaped by his own cultural biases. And that's what keeps historians debating not just the facts themselves, but how Polo chose to present them. This interplay between observation and interpretation takes an even stranger turn when we examine his claims about another group, the Nestorian Christians of the East. Polo wrote of encountering Christian communities in Central Asia, even suggesting that the legendary Prester John, a mythical Christian king Europeans had been searching for, might rule there. Was this wishful thinking a genuine misunderstanding or evidence of a lost chapter in religious history? The mystery deepens as we follow Polo's trail into the realm of faith and folklore. One of the most tantalizing threads in Marco Polo's narrative is his claim to have encountered Nestorian Christians deep within the Mongol Empire, a revelation that sent shockwaves through medieval Europe. He described communities in China and Central Asia practicing a form of Christianity that had drifted far from Roman Catholic orthodoxy, complete with their own churches and rituals. To European readers, this was electrifying. Could these be remnants of the fabled Prester John's kingdom, a mythical Christian realm long sought by crusaders and missionaries? Or were Polo's accounts another layer of embellishment in an already controversial travelogue? The truth, as often with Polo, lies in a fascinating gray area. Nestorian Christianity, a branch of the faith that split from mainstream doctrine in the 5th century, had indeed spread eastward along the Silk Road centuries before Polo's journey. Archaeological discoveries like the Nestorian stele unearthed in China's Shaanxi province in 1625 confirm the presence of Christian communities as early as the 7th century. This stone monument, inscribed in both Chinese and Syriac, documents the arrival of Nestorian missionaries and their interactions with Tang dynasty emperors. Even more compelling are the ruins of Nestorian churches found in Mongol-era sites, their walls adorned with crosses blending Christian and Buddhist motifs, a detail Polo himself noted with curiosity. Yet for all this evidence, historians still wrestle with Polo's specificity. He claimed to have visited Nestorian communities in cities like Kashgar and Samarkand, even describing their unique practice of baptizing with fire rather than water. No other contemporary sources corroborate this ritual, leaving scholars divided. Some argue Polo conflated different religious practices he encountered, while others suggest he might have witnessed a local adaptation of Nestorian rites. What's undeniable is how his reports ignited Europe's imagination. For missionaries, they offered hope of finding allies in the East. For cartographers, they reshaped maps with speculative Christian kingdoms. This blend of fact and longing reveals a deeper truth about Polo's world. The medieval mind was as much a territory of myth as the lands he traveled. When he described the Nestorians, or the Arbor Sec, a mythical dried tree supposedly marking the boundary between Christian and Mongol lands, he wasn't just recording geography. He was weaving together hearsay, personal observation, and the era's hunger for wonder. And that brings us to one of the greatest puzzles of all, the places in his writings that defy modern identification. Take his vivid account of the province of Lob, a desolate region where travelers heard eerie voices in the wind, voices he attributed to spirits. For centuries, this was dismissed as fantasy. Then, in the 1900s, explorers realized Polo might have been describing the singing sand dunes of the Gobi Desert, where wind patterns create haunting, music-like vibrations. It's a reminder that even his strangest claims often hold a kernel of truth, waiting for the right key to unlock them. Whether describing lost Christians or phantom landscapes, Polo's words continue to challenge us to separate the world as it was from the world as he imagined it. Marco Polo's description of Madagascar is one of his most baffling and unexpectedly accurate accounts. He wrote of an island teeming with creatures beyond European comprehension, including birds so massive they could lift elephants into the air. To his medieval audience, this was pure fantasy. Yet centuries later, explorers uncovered the remains of the elephant bird, a flightless giant standing over 10 feet tall and weighing nearly 1,000 pounds. The discovery forced historians to reconsider. Was Polo's outrageous claim actually a distorted glimpse of a real, long-lost species? The elephant bird, native to Madagascar, had been extinct for centuries by Polo's time, but its bones, some as large as tree trunks, would have been impossible to miss. Local legends likely preserved memories of these creatures, and Polo may have encountered their remains or heard tales from traders. His account, though exaggerated, captures the essence of what made Madagascar so mysterious to outsiders, a land where reality rivaled myth. But here's where the story twists. Polo didn't just describe the birds, he claimed they were predatory, with a taste for elephants. This detail, clearly fabricated, reveals how easily fact and folklore blended in his narrative. Why would he add such an implausible twist? The answer lies in the medieval appetite for the extraordinary. Polo's audience craved stories of the impossible, and he delivered by amplifying local legends with European flair. Yet even his embellishments hint at truth. The elephant bird's eggs, large enough to hold over 2 gallons of liquid, were prized by Malagasy communities for centuries. Polo's mention of giant eggs aligns with archaeological finds, suggesting he'd either seen them or heard credible reports. This duality, grounded observation layered with myth, defines his entire approach to the unknown. The mystery deepens when we consider how Polo's giants influenced European cartography for generations. Maps began depicting Madagascar as a land of monsters, a trope that persisted well into the age of exploration. His words didn't just record the world, they shaped how it was imagined, and that raises a provocative question. If Polo could transform a flightless bird into a mythical beast, how much of his other discoveries were similarly reframed? This tension between documentation and storytelling reaches its peak in his descriptions of currency, particularly his claim that the Mongols used paper money. To Europeans who traded in gold and silver, the idea of money made from tree bark seemed ludicrous. Yet once again, Polo was right. The Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan did issue paper currency, complete with anti-counterfeiting measures. His detailed account of its production, boiling bark into pulp, stamping it with seals, matches historical records. But why did this detail, unlike his giants, escape skepticism? Perhaps because it lacked the sensationalism of man-eating birds, or maybe because it hinted at a truth too revolutionary to ignore, that the East possessed innovations far beyond Europe's grasp. As we unravel these contradictions, a pattern emerges. Marco Polo wasn't just a traveler or a storyteller, he was a prism refracting the unfamiliar through the lens of his time. Whether describing giant birds or paper money, his words forced Europe to confront a world wider and stranger than it had ever dreamed, and that's what makes his legacy so enduring. Every claim, no matter how outlandish, invites us to ask, where does the line between witness and mythmaker truly lie? Marco Polo's description of paper money in the Mongol Empire left his European readers utterly bewildered. Imagine their reaction when he claimed that Kublai Khan's government produced currency from the bark of mulberry trees, not gold or silver, but something as flimsy as paper. To medieval Europeans who equated wealth with precious metals, the idea seemed absurd. Yet Polo's account was startlingly precise. He detailed how the bark was boiled, pressed, and stamped with the Khan's seal, creating notes that carried the same legal weight as coins. Even more remarkably, he described the penalty for counterfeiting: death. This wasn't just a financial system, it was a revolution. What Polo witnessed was the world's first widespread use of fiat currency, a concept Europe wouldn't embrace for centuries. The Mongols didn't back their money with gold reserves. Its value came solely from the government's decree. Polo marveled at how this system allowed the Khan to fund his empire's sprawling infrastructure, from roads to granaries, without depleting his treasuries. But here's where historians pause. Did Polo grasp the economic genius or the risks behind this innovation? His writings show awe at the convenience of paper money, but he never mentions the inflation that plagued the Yuan dynasty in later years. Some scholars argue this omission suggests he didn't fully understand the system's fragility, while others counter that he simply recorded what he saw during the currency's stable early years. The debate takes an intriguing turn when we compare Polo's account with Chinese records. The yuan indeed struggled with overprinting notes, leading to devaluation, a fact Polo either missed or chose to exclude. Was this a gap in his knowledge, or was he, like many travelers, selectively reporting what would impress his audience? The answer may lie in another economic curiosity he documented: salt. In Tibet, Polo noted that compressed blocks of salt served as currency, with smaller pieces broken off for transactions. This wasn't just barter, it was a commodity-based system where salt's universal usefulness gave it inherent value. Unlike paper money, which relied on trust in the state, salt currency reflected a more primal understanding of worth. Polo's juxtaposition of these two systems, one cutting edge, the other ancient, reveals a keen eye for economic diversity. Yet it also raises questions. Why did he dwell on the novelty of paper money while treating salt as a mere oddity? The contrast hints at his own cultural biases, framing Mongol innovations as marvels while dismissing older practices as quirks. This tension between observation and interpretation runs through all his economic descriptions. Whether marveling at paper or puzzling over salt, Polo wasn't just recording facts, he was filtering them through the lens of a medieval merchant. And that's what makes his financial accounts so enduringly fascinating. They're not just snapshots of Mongol economics, they're windows into how Europe's commercial imagination began stretching beyond the limits of coin and scale. Marco Polo's encounter with salt block currency in Tibet was more than just a curious footnote. It was a direct challenge to everything Europeans thought they knew about money. When he described locals trading with cakes of salt stamped with the Great Khan's mark, his readers back home must have struggled to picture it. After all, how could something as ordinary as salt hold the same value as gold or silver? Yet Polo's observation wasn't just plausible, it was rooted in a practice that stretched back millennia. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence of salt used as currency in China as early as the 1st century, pressed into bricks for easy transport along trade routes. The sheer practicality of it made perfect sense in remote regions like Tibet, where salt was scarce enough to be precious but durable enough to circulate like coinage. What makes Polo's account so fascinating isn't just the existence of salt money, it's the cultural shock it reveals. To medieval Europeans, wealth was intrinsically tied to metal. Coins bore the faces of kings, and their value came from the weight of precious metals they contained. The idea that value could be assigned to a consumable commodity like salt forced a radical rethink. Polo even noted how smaller pieces were broken off for minor purchases, much like cutting a coin into halves or quarters. This detail suggests he wasn't just repeating hearsay, he'd likely witnessed the system in action. But here's where historians spot a subtle bias. While he marveled at paper money's sophistication, his tone shifts when describing salt, calling it a strange custom. The difference in framing speaks volumes about how cultural hierarchies colored his perceptions. The deeper irony: Europe would later adopt its own versions of commodity money during crises, from tobacco leaves in colonial Virginia to tea bricks in Siberia. Polo's strange system was in fact a universal response to economic need. Yet his account leaves one glaring question unanswered. How did these salt blocks retain their value across vast distances? The answer lies in the very thing that made them practical: their utility. Unlike gold, salt was always in demand for preserving food, sustaining livestock, and even medicinal use. Its value wasn't arbitrary, it was baked into daily survival. This tension between the familiar and the foreign takes a surreal turn as Polo's narrative ventures beyond tangible trade into the realm of legend. After cataloging real-world economic systems, he suddenly references places that seemed ripped from medieval folklore, like the island of Dondon, where he claimed inhabitants had tales. Such jarring shifts remind us that even the most grounded travelers couldn't resist the pull of myth when faced with the unexplored. Whether these tales stemmed from mistranslation, local storytelling, or outright fabrication, they reveal a truth more compelling than fact: the human instinct to fill blank spaces on the map with wonder. And that's where Polo's greatest legacy lies, not just in what he got right or wrong, but in the irresistible collision of observation and imagination that keeps us questioning centuries later. Among Marco Polo's most tantalizing claims is his description of the so-called Kingdom of Women, a land ruled entirely by matriarchs where men were relegated to the margins. He painted a vivid picture: women governed, hunted, and even took multiple husbands while men stayed home to tend children. To medieval Europeans, this wasn't just exotic, it was a complete inversion of their world. But was Polo reporting an actual society, or was this a fantastical twist inspired by ancient legends of Amazons? The answer lies somewhere between myth and misunderstood reality. Historians have long debated the possible origins of Polo's account. Some suggest he may have encountered remnants of matrilineal cultures in the Himalayas or Yunnan, where ethnic groups like the Mosyo people, known for their walking marriages and female-headed households, still practice traditions that align loosely with his descriptions. Others argue Polo was recycling much older tales, like those of the mythical Amazons, which had circulated since Greek antiquity. The Persian traveler Rashid al-Din, writing around the same time, also mentioned a land of women in Central Asia, hinting that such stories were part of a broader Silk Road lore. What makes Polo's version stand out are the specific details he included, like the claim that these women wore armor made of animal hide and hunted with eagles. These elements echo real practices among nomadic steppe tribes, where women often participated in falconry and warfare. Yet his insistence that men were forbidden from staying more than one night in the kingdom feels suspiciously like a folktale trope. The truth may be that Polo blended scraps of truth with sensationalism, creating a narrative that was just plausible enough to captivate his audience. This blurring of fact and fantasy takes on new meaning when we compare Polo's account to other medieval travelogues. The Franciscan friar Odoric of Pordenone, who journeyed through Asia a few decades later, also wrote of a female-only island, but his version included women who conceived by bathing in magical springs. The stark difference between these reports suggests that distant cultures became blank canvases for projecting European anxieties and fascinations. Polo's relatively grounded description, by contrast, hints at a kernel of anthropological observation beneath the embellishment. As we peel back these layers, a bigger question emerges. Why were these stories so persistent? Perhaps because they challenged the rigid gender norms of medieval Europe, offering a glimpse of worlds where power dynamics were flipped. Or maybe they simply fed the era's appetite for the extraordinary. Either way, Polo's Kingdom of Women reveals less about Asia than about the European imagination, a place where the line between traveler and storyteller was always porous. And just as Polo's tales of matriarchs blurred reality and myth, so too did his accounts of the technological wonders he witnessed. From gunpowder to movable type, the East's innovations left him awestruck but not always understood. His descriptions of black powder that roared like thunder, or books printed without scribes, were met with skepticism back home. Yet these too, like his warrior women, would one day prove startlingly prescient. Marco Polo's awe at China's engineering feats leaps off the page. His descriptions of vast stone bridges, so long that a man could scarcely cross them in half a day, and canals threading through cities like veins left European readers breathless. But here's the puzzle. Did he actually witness these marvels himself, or was he stitching together stories from other travelers? The debate hinges on a single, tantalizing inconsistency. While Polo raved about the grandeur of China's infrastructure, he never mentioned the Great Wall, an omission so glaring that some historians argue it proves he never set foot in northern China at all. Yet his accounts of lesser-known structures hold surprising accuracy. Take the Lugu Bridge near Beijing, which he described with its 300 arches and lion statues. Modern measurements confirm the bridge still standing today has precisely 281 pillars, each topped with a stone lion. That level of specificity suggests Polo saw it firsthand. Even more compelling is his description of lock gates on the Grand Canal, a hydraulic innovation Europe wouldn't adopt for centuries. He detailed how water levels were raised and lowered to move ships between elevations, a system so precisely rendered that engineers later reconstructed its mechanics from his words alone. The smoking gun in this debate might be something far stranger: asbestos. Polo wrote of a mineral cloth that wouldn't burn, woven into napkins that were cleansed by tossing them into flames. To Europeans, this sounded like sorcery, but asbestos fabric was indeed used in Mongol courts, prized for its fireproof qualities. Polo's account includes a telling detail. He claimed the fibers came from a vein in the earth, matching the mineral's natural geological formation. This wasn't the kind of detail a second-hand source would likely provide. So why the gaps? The answer may lie in Polo's role as a storyteller rather than a chronicler. He emphasized what would dazzle his audience: the soaring bridges, the floating cities, while skipping landmarks that didn't fit his narrative of wonder. The Great Wall in his era was largely a crumbling relic, less impressive than the Mongols' thriving canals. And that's the irony. The very omissions used to discredit him might actually prove his authenticity. A fabricator would have included the wall simply because it was famous. Polo's selectivity, flawed as it was, speaks to a deeper truth. He recorded what fascinated him, not what he thought should fascinate others. This tension between eyewitness and embellisher reaches its peak with his account of Hangzhou's causeways. He described paved roads so wide 10 horsemen could ride abreast, lined with trees to shade travelers. Archaeological digs have since uncovered remnants of these very roads, complete with drainage systems Polo never mentioned. It's a perfect snapshot of his method, breathtakingly accurate on the broad strokes, fuzzy on the finer details. Whether by fault of memory, translation, or sheer overwhelm at the scale of Chinese innovation, his writings capture both the brilliance and the limits of cross-cultural observation. And that's what makes them so endlessly debatable, not as a binary of truth or lies, but as a mosaic of human curiosity straining against the boundaries of the known world. Marco Polo's account of fireproof cloth woven from stone reads like something out of alchemy, yet it's one of the most verifiable details in his entire travelogue. When he described Mongol nobles using napkins that could be cleansed by tossing them into flames, his European audience dismissed it as pure fantasy. How could fabric possibly emerge unscathed from fire? The answer lay in a mineral Europeans wouldn't understand for centuries: asbestos. Polo called it salamander's wool, a reference to the mythical creature said to thrive in flames, but his description of its origin, a vein in the earth, was eerily accurate. Miners in China had been extracting asbestos fibers for over 2,000 years, spinning them into fire-resistant textiles for emperors and diplomats. The science behind this magic cloth is as fascinating as Polo's account. Asbestos forms in long, flexible fibers that can be woven like cotton, yet its molecular structure resists combustion. When Polo noted how these fabrics grew brighter rather than burned, he was observing a property modern chemists call thermal stability. But here's the twist: while his observations were correct, his terminology deepened the confusion. By linking asbestos to the mythical salamander, he inadvertently cemented a legend that persisted for generations. Medieval Europeans, already steeped in bestiaries of flame-resistant beasts, conflated the mineral with folklore. Even Leonardo da Vinci later wrote that salamanders have no digestive organs because they fed on fire, a testament to how Polo's words shaped scientific misconceptions. Why did this particular detail face such skepticism when so many of Polo's other claims were eventually validated? Part of the answer lies in Europe's limited experience with minerals. Unlike China, where asbestos was used in everything from lamp wicks to burial shrouds, the West had no equivalent material. Without a frame of reference, Polo's fireproof cloth seemed less like innovation and more like sorcery. But there's another layer. The Mongols guarded the secret of asbestos mining closely, treating it as a state secret. Polo likely only saw the finished products, luxurious tablecloths or ceremonial garments, without witnessing their production firsthand. That gap in knowledge left room for exaggeration, turning a remarkable but mundane technology into something supernatural. This blend of fact and mysticism takes on new meaning when we examine how Polo's asbestos account mirrors his approach to nature's other wonders. Just as he framed a mineral as mythical salamander wool, he transformed ordinary animals into creatures of legend. His descriptions of crocodiles as serpents with legs or rhinoceroses as unicorns followed the same pattern: accurate observations filtered through a medieval European lens. The difference is that asbestos, unlike exotic wildlife, had no place in existing bestiaries. It forced his readers to confront something truly alien, not just an unfamiliar beast, but a substance that defied the very laws of nature as they understood them. And that's what makes this detail so pivotal. Polo's fireproof cloth wasn't just a curiosity, it was a crack in the medieval worldview. If stone could be spun into fabric, and fabric could conquer fire, what other impossibilities might the East hold? A question haunted Europe long after Polo's death, fueling both scientific curiosity and wild speculation. Little did his readers know that the truth, woven into the very fibers of those Mongol napkins, was stranger than any salamander myth. Marco Polo's account of the Great Khan's hunting expeditions includes a curious detail that's left zoologists scratching their heads: his description of leopards trained to chase down prey. At first glance, this seems plausible until you consider the logistics. Leopards, with their solitary and fiercely independent nature, are notoriously difficult to train. So what exactly was Polo witnessing? The answer may lie in a centuries-old case of mistaken identity. Historians now suspect Polo was actually describing cheetahs, not leopards. The distinction might seem minor, but it reveals a fascinating cultural gap. Cheetahs, unlike their more aggressive cousins, were domesticated for hunting across Asia and the Middle East for thousands of years. Mughal paintings and Persian manuscripts depict nobles with cheetahs perched on horseback, their sleek bodies hooded like falcons until released to sprint after deer or gazelles. Polo's confusion likely stemmed from language. The Persian word yaz could refer to both big cats, and Venetian translators may have defaulted to the more familiar leopard. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Some scholars argue Polo might have encountered something even rarer: clouded leopards. Smaller than African leopards but agile climbers, these cats were occasionally used by Southeast Asian royalty to flush arboreal game from trees. Their dappled coats resembling shifting shadows could explain Polo's emphasis on the animal's striking appearance. Yet without sketches or clearer descriptions, the truth remains elusive. What's undeniable is how this detail reflects the Mongols' sophisticated understanding of animal behavior. Whether they were leveraging cheetahs' speed or clouded leopards' climbing prowess, their hunts were feats of interspecies teamwork. This ambiguity spills over into another of Polo's head-scratching accounts: the Khan's banquets featuring dishes that defied European imagination. He wrote of roasted lizards served on beds of spice and camel humps basted in honey, dishes that sounded grotesque to Venetian sensibilities but were likely delicacies in Mongol court cuisine. Just as with the hunting cats, Polo's descriptions waver between precise observation and cultural reinterpretation. A roasted lizard might have been a monitor lizard, a protein-rich staple for desert nomads, while camel hump was almost certainly fatty meat prized for its richness. The line between fact and exoticism blurs yet again, reminding us how much gets lost or invented in translation. What ties these details together is Polo's struggle to categorize the utterly unfamiliar. Whether facing a trained big cat or a sizzling platter of unknown meat, he reached for the closest European equivalent, often distorting the reality in the process. And that's the heart of the debate. Were these slips accidental, or did Polo, like any good storyteller, know that a hint of the exotic would keep his audience leaning in? The answer, much like the identity of those elusive hunting cats, may forever hover just out of reach. Marco Polo's observation about locals eating raw garlic to prevent illness might sound like folk wisdom, but it reveals a fascinating collision between medieval medicine and modern science. He described how people in Central Asia would chew cloves of garlic daily, believing it shielded them from disease, a practice his Venetian readers likely found both bizarre and barbaric. Yet what seemed like superstition to 14th century Europe was actually rooted in centuries of medical tradition across Asia. Garlic's antimicrobial properties were well known in Chinese and Persian medicine long before Polo's travels, with texts prescribing it for everything from digestive complaints to wound infections. The real question isn't whether garlic had health benefits. It clearly did, but whether Polo recognized this as a legitimate practice or dismissed it as exotic oddity. His tone offers clues. Unlike his dramatic accounts of cannibals or unicorns, Polo's garlic passage is strikingly matter-of-fact. He doesn't frame it as miraculous or strange, suggesting he may have adopted the habit himself during his travels. This would align with historical records of Silk Road merchants carrying garlic as both food and medicine. But here's the twist: while Polo was right about garlic's medicinal use, his explanation for why it worked, claiming it purged bad air, reflects the flawed science of his era. Medieval Europe still clung to the miasma theory, blaming disease on foul odors rather than germs. So even as Polo documented an effective practice, he misinterpreted its mechanism, layering contemporary bias over observed tradition. The deeper intrigue lies in how this detail connects to broader debates about Polo's reliability. Unlike his fantastical creatures or mythical kingdoms, the Garlic account is almost boringly plausible. No one would invent such a mundane observation to impress readers, which lends it credibility. Archaeologists have even unearthed garlic cloves preserved in Mongol-era storage pits along trade routes, physical evidence supporting his claim. Yet this very mundanity raises another question. Why include it at all? Perhaps because Polo, for all his flair, understood that survival in unfamiliar lands often hinged on adopting local wisdom, whether swallowing bitter cloves or trusting guides through treacherous passes. This tension between observation and interpretation takes a cosmic turn as Polo shifts from earthly remedies to celestial mysteries. He claimed the Mongols could predict eclipses with uncanny accuracy using tables of stars, a skill that seemed like magic to Europeans still reliant on ecclesiastical calendars. Modern scholars now recognize these as astronomical charts developed by Persian and Chinese scholars, refined over centuries of observation. Polo's brief mention, almost an aside, hints at a technological gap far more consequential than Garlic, the East's mastery of the heavens while Europe fumbled in the dark. Whether he grasped the magnitude of this disparity is unclear, but his words unknowingly documented a turning point in history, the moment when the stars themselves bore witness to civilizations moving at different speeds. Marco Polo's claim that the North Star disappeared near the equator sent shockwaves through medieval Europe's understanding of the heavens. For navigators who relied on Polaris as their celestial anchor, the idea that it could vanish was unthinkable. Yet Polo insisted that as he sailed south, the star gradually dipped below the horizon until it was completely invisible. To astronomers of his time, this sounded like heresy. How could a fixed point in the sky, believed to be divinely placed, simply drop out of sight? The answer lies in a fundamental truth about Earth's shape that Polo's contemporaries hadn't fully grasped: our planet's curvature. What Polo witnessed was the simple mechanics of spherical geometry. Polaris sits almost directly above the North Pole, meaning its position in the sky depends entirely on the observer's latitude. At the equator, the star hovers just at the horizon, effectively disappearing as Polo described. This phenomenon was already well documented by Arab and Persian astronomers who'd mapped stars far south of the Mediterranean. But in Europe, where navigation rarely ventured below the latitude of North Africa, the concept was revolutionary. Polo's account, rather than being an error, revealed his exposure to advanced astronomical knowledge from Mongol and Islamic scholars, knowledge that would take centuries to permeate European thought. The real mystery isn't whether Polo was right, but why he framed it as a startling discovery rather than common knowledge. This gap highlights the uneven spread of scientific understanding in the medieval world. While Chinese astronomers had calculated celestial motions with precision using armillary spheres, and Arab navigators used camels to measure star angles at sea, Europe still clung to flat Earth folklore. Polo's description of confused sailors praying to saints as the North Star faded suggests he recognized this disparity, even if he didn't fully comprehend the science behind it. This celestial detail takes on deeper significance when we consider how differently cultures interpreted the cosmos. For Mongol horsemen, the night sky was a vast clock face. They timed military campaigns by the phases of the moon. Polynesian navigators, meanwhile, read star paths like road maps long before Polo set sail. His astonishment at the vanishing North Star says less about the heavens themselves than about the insularity of European astronomy. Yet even here, Polo's account contains a tantalizing omission. He never mentions the Southern Cross, a constellation visible below the equator that Arab traders used as their guiding light. Did he fail to notice it, or did he assume his audience wouldn't care about stars they'd never see? The intersection of navigation and belief systems adds another layer to this puzzle. Polo noted that as Polaris disappeared, crews resorted to chanting and ritual to calm their fears, a detail that hints at how deeply astronomy and religion intertwined. This sets the stage for an even more provocative claim in his writings: descriptions of star-worshipping tribes who allegedly predicted eclipses by tracking celestial patterns. Were these communities practicing advanced astronomy, or was Polo projecting European anxieties onto foreign rituals? The line between science and spirituality, it seems, was as fluid as the horizon that swallowed his guiding star. Marco Polo's description of Persian fire worshippers is one of his most vivid and controversial religious accounts. He wrote of temples where flames burned eternally, tended by priests who chanted over sacred fires believed to purify the soul. To his Christian audience, this seemed like pagan idolatry, but Polo's observations actually captured elements of Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest continuous faiths. The problem: his account also contained glaring inaccuracies, like claiming worshippers threw animal carcasses into the flames, a practice no Zoroastrian text or archaeological record supports. So where did these distortions come from? The answer lies in the tangled web of medieval religious encounters. Polo likely witnessed Zoroastrian rituals in Persia, where fire temples had flourished for centuries. The eternal flames he described were real holy fires, symbolized divine wisdom in Zoroastrian theology, and priests did recite prayers before them, but his added details suggest he conflated multiple traditions. The animal carcass story, for instance, mirrors Tibetan sky burials, where bodies were left exposed to the elements. Either Polo's guides mixed up local customs, or he blended second-hand tales into a single, sensationalized narrative. What makes this confusion so revealing is how it reflects broader medieval attitudes toward unfamiliar faiths. Europeans often lumped non-Christian practices together under labels like idolatry or fire worship, ignoring theological nuances. Polo was no exception. His account reduced Zoroastrianism's complex cosmology to a spectacle of blazing altars, yet even his flawed description preserved priceless details. His mention of priests covering their mouths to avoid contaminating the fire aligns perfectly with Zoroastrian purity laws, proving he did observe real rituals. The tension between accuracy and exaggeration here is a microcosm of his entire travelogue, glimpses of truth refracted through layers of cultural bias. The fire worshipper passage takes on new significance when we consider Polo's own religious lens. As a Christian merchant in Mongol lands, he moved through a world where faiths collided daily. Buddhist monks, Muslim scholars, and Nestorian Christians all crossed paths in Silk Road cities. His descriptions of Zoroastrians, though imperfect, show him grappling with this diversity. Unlike later colonizers who dismissed foreign religions as devilry, Polo approached them with curiosity, even if he didn't fully understand them. That openness, however flawed, marked a radical shift in medieval thought. This interplay of observation and misconception finds a parallel in Polo's account of Mongol warfare. Just as he both documented and distorted Zoroastrian rites, his descriptions of military tactics blended first-hand reporting with hearsay. He claimed Mongol horsemen could ride for days without dismounting, surviving on mare's milk and blood, a feat that seemed superhuman to Europeans. Yet here again, reality and legend intertwined. While the Mongols' endurance was legendary, the blood-drinking detail likely stemmed from misreported emergency rations. Polo's religious and military accounts share a common thread: the struggle to translate the extraordinary into terms his audience could grasp, even if it meant bending the truth. And that's what makes his writing so endlessly debated, not just what he got right or wrong, but why he told the story the way he did. Marco Polo's description of the Khan's messengers wielding arrows as tokens of authority sounds like something straight out of a legend, but this wasn't just poetic flair. He claimed these couriers carried inscribed arrows that granted them the power to commandeer fresh horses or demand supplies from any village along the Silk Road. To European readers, the idea of an arrow functioning as a royal passport seemed bizarre, yet this detail might be one of his most accurate observations. Archaeologists have unearthed Mongol-era arrowheads engraved with official seals, while Persian chronicles from the same period describe similar systems where arrows symbolized urgent, unbreakable orders. The genius of this method lay in its simplicity. An arrow was lightweight, instantly recognizable, and impossible to counterfeit without access to the Khan's craftsmen. But here's where historians split. Some argue these arrows were purely symbolic, like a sheriff's badge, while others believe they served a practical function, perhaps even containing hidden compartments for scrolls. Polo's account leans toward the latter, mentioning that messages were sometimes bound to the shaft in wax-sealed tubes. This would align with the Mongols' famed efficiency. Their YAM network of relay stations could move information faster than any empire before them. Couriers galloping day and night, swapping exhausted horses at each stop, didn't have time for lengthy authentication rituals. An arrow in hand was all the proof they needed. The deeper intrigue lies in how this system mirrored broader Mongol strategies. Just as arrows cut through the air with precision, their communication networks sliced across continents, tethering the empire together. Chinese records mention whistling arrows used to signal attacks, while Turkic tribes employed similar tokens to mark alliances. Polo's observation might even hint at a hierarchy among messengers. Certain arrows could have denoted higher ranks or greater urgency. Imagine a village elder seeing a courier approach with a gold-tipped arrow versus a plain iron one. The difference would be as clear as a siren's wail. Yet for all its plausibility, Polo's arrow messengers still raise one unresolved question. Why did no other contemporary European traveler mention them? The silence of missionaries and merchants who followed the Silk Road suggests either Polo embellished the system's theatricality, or he witnessed a short-lived practice that faded with the empire's decline. Either way, his account offers a glimpse into the Mongols' mastery of psychological power, where even a simple arrow could carry the weight of an emperor's will. This blend of symbolism and pragmatism sets the stage for an even more enigmatic detail in Polo's writings: his fleeting mention of a creature called the Jurgui, a beast said to vanish into mist when pursued. Was this a misidentified antelope, a folkloric embellishment, or something far stranger? The answer, much like the Khan's arrows, seems to dart just beyond our grasp. Marco Polo's account of a creature he called the Griffon stands as one of his most puzzling claims: a beast with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and talons strong enough to crush bones. To his medieval readers, this sounded like pure fantasy, a relic of bestiaries filled with mythical hybrids. But what if Polo wasn't inventing this creature outright? What if he was staring at the remains of a real prehistoric giant without realizing it? The answer might lie in the windswept deserts of Central Asia, where even today the earth coughs up the skeletons of long-extinct creatures. Protoceratops fossils, small, beaked dinosaurs with bony frills, are scattered across the go-by, their skulls eerily resembling the griffons of legend. When Polo described locals pointing to these bones as proof of the beast's existence, he may have been documenting one of history's earliest encounters with dinosaur remains. The connection isn't as far-fetched as it seems. Ancient Scythian nomads crafted griffon art centuries before Polo, likely inspired by the same fossils. The real question isn't whether these bones existed, but how Polo interpreted them. Did he genuinely believe griffons still roamed remote valleys, or was he simply recording the local folklore with a storyteller's flair? Here's where the debate gets heated. Some scholars argue Polo's griffon was purely a literary device, borrowed from Herodotus's ancient tales to spice up his narrative. Others point to his meticulous description of the creature's alleged nesting grounds, specific valleys where, coincidentally, paleontologists later found dense fossil beds. This level of geographic precision suggests he wasn't just recycling myths. He was trying to make sense of something tangible but inexplicable. The tension between these views reveals a deeper truth. Polo's world had no framework for understanding fossils beyond myth. When faced with the unknown, even the most observant travelers defaulted to the language of legend. This collision of bone and myth takes a provocative turn when Polo shifts from creatures to human behavior. In the same passage where he describes griffons, he claims certain Central Asian tribes practiced ritual cannibalism not out of hunger, but as a sacred act of absorbing a deceased elder's wisdom. Modern anthropologists have found no evidence of such rituals in the region, leading many to dismiss this as another tall tale. Yet Polo's account echoes real funerary practices among some Siberian groups, where symbolic consumption of ashes or relics honored the dead. Was he witnessing a misunderstood rite, or did the same imagination that conjured griffons also invent these savage customs? The griffon episode, like so much of Polo's travelogue, forces us to confront the limits of medieval understanding. Whether describing fossilized bones or foreign mourning rituals, he straddled the line between documentation and distortion, leaving us to wonder how much of what we know about the past is equally colored by the lenses we can't help but look through. As we unravel these threads, one thing becomes clear: Polo's greatest legacy isn't just the places he saw, but the questions he forces us to ask about how we see them. Marco Polo's description of so-called dog-faced tribes in the Andaman Islands remains one of his most controversial passages, a jarring example of how medieval travelers interpreted physical differences through the lens of fear and fantasy. He wrote of people with elongated snouts, sharp teeth, and hair covering their bodies, framing them as barely human. To modern readers, this sounds like blatant racism, but the truth may be more complicated. Anthropologists suggest Polo might have encountered the indigenous Jarowa or Onge tribes, whose traditional face paint and filed teeth for ceremonial purposes could appear startlingly canine-like to an outsider. Add language barriers and the medieval belief in monstrous races lurking at the edges of the world, and the stage was set for a profound misunderstanding. Comparing Polo's account to other travelogues reveals a troubling pattern. The Franciscan friar Odoric of Pordenone described similar dogmen in Southeast Asia, while Arab geographer al-Masudi wrote of entire islands inhabited by beast-like humans. These weren't isolated observations, they reflected a widespread Eurocentric habit of dehumanizing unfamiliar cultures. Yet Polo's version stands out for its eerie specificity. He claimed these tribes communicated through barks and howls, a detail absent from other accounts. Was this embellishment, or did he witness a hunting ritual where calls mimicked animal sounds? Without first-hand records from the Jarowa themselves, we're left weighing colonial-era biases against the possibility of lost cultural context. The debate takes a darker turn when we examine how these descriptions were weaponized. Within decades of Polo's travelogue circulating, European maps began labeling the Andamans as islands of the dog-faced, justifying brutal slave raids under the guise of civilizing subhuman populations. This tragic legacy forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Did Polo's words merely reflect the prejudices of his time, or did they actively fuel them? The line between observation and consequence blurs here, reminding us that travel writing was never neutral. It shaped empires. But just when Polo's credibility seems irreparably tarnished, another layer emerges. Recent studies of ancient DNA reveal that some Andamanese groups possess genetic markers distinct from any other population, with physical traits that might have seemed extraordinary to medieval eyes. Could Polo's dog-faced people have been an isolated tribe with unique characteristics, their appearance exaggerated through the game of telephone across languages and cultures? It's a possibility that doesn't excuse his framing but complicates easy judgment. This tension between perception and reality sets the stage for a far more tantalizing mystery in Polo's writings, his fleeting mention of a hidden valley where rubies grew like carrots in the earth. Was this another exotic fantasy, or evidence of a lost gem deposit that modern geologists have yet to rediscover? The answer lies buried beneath centuries of speculation, waiting to be unearthed. Marco Polo's descriptions of Sri Lanka's pearl divers read like scenes from an adventure tale, men plunging into shark-infested waters, clutching ropes weighted with stones, their lungs burning as they scooped oysters from the ocean floor. He claimed divers could stay submerged for impossibly long stretches, surfacing with shells brimming with perfect pearls that glowed like moons. To European readers, this was both mesmerizing and suspect. How could humans endure such conditions, and were these pearls truly as flawless as Polo suggested, or was this another embellishment to dazzle his audience? The truth, like the oysters themselves, hides layers beneath the surface. Historical records from Arab and Chinese traders confirm that Sri Lanka's pearl beds were legendary long before Polo's arrival. The Persian geographer Al-Idrisi wrote of divers using hollow reeds to breathe underwater, a detail Polo omitted, while Chinese accounts mention pearl sizes so impressive they were reserved for emperors. But Polo's version stands out for its dramatic flair. His insistence that divers faced great serpents in the depths likely conflated local warnings about moray eels with medieval sea monster lore. More telling is his focus on the pearl's perfection. While Sri Lankan pearls were indeed prized, archaeological finds from the period reveal many were irregular or tinted, not the uniform orbs Polo described. This gap between reality and rhetoric raises a tantalizing question. Was he exaggerating to elevate the Khan's wealth, or did he simply privilege the most spectacular specimens in his storytelling? The pearl trade's economics add another wrinkle. Polo claimed divers handed their haul directly to Mongol officials, who paid them a pittance. Yet tax ledgers from Ceylon's kingdoms show local rulers tightly controlled the beds, auctioning diving rights to merchants. If Polo witnessed this system, why did he frame it as imperial plunder? The answer may lie in his audience. Venetian traders, hungry for tales of Eastern riches, would have relished narratives of exotic wealth extraction. By painting the Khan as a monopolist, Polo made the pearls seem even more unattainable, and his own journey more extraordinary. What makes this detail so enduringly controversial isn't just its accuracy, but its legacy. Polo's account became a blueprint for European fantasies of Oriental abundance, fueling colonial lust for Sri Lanka's resources. Centuries later, Portuguese invaders would scour the same waters, their expectations inflated by his words. And that's the irony. Whether factual or embellished, Polo's pearls shaped history far beyond their actual worth. As we surface from these depths, one final mystery remains, the 20th and most hotly debated detail in Polo's entire travelogue. It's a claim so startling that historians still argue whether it's proof of his genius or his gullibility. His description of a land where gold grew on trees. Of all Marco Polo's tantalizing claims, none sparkles quite like his description of a Tibetan river of gems, a waterway where rubies and sapphires supposedly tumbled along the riverbed like ordinary pebbles. To his European audience, this sounded like pure fantasy, but modern geologists offer a surprising twist. Certain stretches of the Yarlung Tsangpo River in Tibet do indeed contain corundum deposits, the mineral family that includes rubies and sapphires. The catch: these stones are usually tiny, dull, or trapped in rock, nothing like the glittering treasures Polo described. So was he exaggerating, or did he stumble upon a now depleted gem field that once dazzled travelers? Local folklore might hold the key. Tibetan legends speak of the Norbu Chu, or a jewel river, where deities scattered precious stones as gifts to devout pilgrims. Polo, ever the storyteller, could have absorbed these tales and woven them into his narrative, transforming spiritual symbolism into literal riches. Yet there's another possibility. The high-altitude valleys near Mount Kailash were once trading hubs for gemstones from Burma and Kashmir. Polo might have seen caravans unloading raw rubies by riverbanks, mistaking a commercial transfer for nature's bounty. The blurred line between observation and interpretation here is classic Polo. His words shimmer between fact and metaphor, leaving us to sift for truth like prospectors panning for gold. The debate takes a deeper turn when we consider how light plays tricks in the Tibetan plateau's thin air. Sunlight at those altitudes can ignite startling colors in ordinary minerals, making quartz fragments glow like emeralds. Could Polo have witnessed this phenomenon during a midday crossing, his report magnified by awe and the mercantile urge to entice investors back home? Venetian traders weren't just adventurers, they were advertisers, and nothing sold like the promise of rivers paved with gems. But perhaps the most intriguing clue lies in Polo's own language. He described the gems as red as pigeon's blood, a phrase still used today to describe the finest Burmese rubies. This specificity suggests he did handle high-quality stones, just not from a river. The Mongols controlled trade routes funneling gems from Southeast Asia to Europe, and Polo likely saw these treasures in Khan's treasuries, later transplanting them into a more dramatic setting. It's a reminder that his greatest skill wasn't just seeing the world, but recomposing it into stories that would echo through centuries. This final mystery encapsulates the enigma of Marco Polo's entire journey. Like the river's elusive gems, his truths are often buried beneath layers of interpretation, waiting for the right light to reveal their facets. Whether describing sapphire currents or salamander cloth, he remains forever suspended between witness and wordsmith, a man who didn't just cross continents, but the shimmering boundary between the real and the imagined. And that's why, 7 centuries later, we're still sifting through his words, searching for the glint of something undeniable beneath the flow of legend. Marco Polo's travelogue is a tapestry woven with equal parts fact, folklore, and fascinating misinterpretation, each thread sparking debates that rage even 7 centuries later. From fireproof salamander cloth that turned out to be asbestos to unicorns that were likely rhinoceroses, his accounts straddle the line between keen observation and creative embellishment. Consider the elephant birds of Madagascar. His description of giant, elephant-lifting creatures seemed ludicrous until science confirmed the existence of 10-foot-tall avian giants. Yet in the same breath, he spun tales of dog-faced tribes and valleys where rubies grew like carrots, blending reality with myth so seamlessly that historians still pick apart his words like detectives at a crime scene. What makes these 20 debated details so enduring isn't just their mystery, it's what they reveal about the human urge to make sense of the unfamiliar. Polo wasn't just a traveler, he was a translator of wonders, filtering the vastness of the Mongol Empire through the lens of a medieval Venetian merchant. When he described paper money or Tibetan salt currency, he documented economic systems far ahead of Europe's. But when faced with the truly inexplicable, like fossilized dinosaur bones he called griffons, he reached for the supernatural, stitching together local legends and his own vivid imagination. This duality is why his work remains irresistible. It's a mirror reflecting both the world as it was and the world as he needed it to be for his audience. The controversies surrounding Polo's writings also expose the biases of his era. His depictions of Andaman Islanders as dog-faced or Nestorian Christians as lost allies of Prester John tell us as much about medieval Europe's fears and fantasies as they do about the places he visited. Every exaggeration, every omission, like the puzzling absence of the Great Wall, offers clues to the pressures he faced. The need to entertain, to justify his journey's expense, and to navigate the delicate politics of cross-cultural storytelling. So why does Polo's legacy endure? Because his travelogue is more than a historical document, it's a challenge. It forces us to ask how much of what we know about distant cultures is shaped by our own assumptions. When modern travelers recount their adventures, don't they too blend fact with flair, emphasizing what astonishes over what's mundane? Polo's genius lay in recognizing that truth isn't just about accuracy, it's about resonance. His accounts, flawed as they are, ignited Europe's curiosity about the wider world, setting the stage for an age of exploration that would reshape the globe. As we close this journey through Polo's contested tales, here's a question to ponder. Which of his details fascinates you the most? Was it the Khan's paper money, the vanishing North Star, or something even stranger? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're hungry for more medieval mysteries, dive into our playlist on lost cities and forgotten voyages, because history, like Polo's travelogue, is never just about the answers. It's about the questions that keep us searching.